All right, welcome back to another Thursday Night Live. My name is Gino D'Angelo. I'm a local Northern Michigan real estate agent specializing in helping you relocate to Northern Michigan, whether it's today, tomorrow, 10 years from now. I hop onto these every Thursday to answer your questions, let you know what is going on in Northern Michigan. And we've got a great one tonight. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, I got a call from a gentleman by the name of Michael Wilkinson, who is a reporter for bridgemichigan.com. And at the time, I had not heard of bridgemichigan.com, but just to give you a little insight of who they are, Bridge Michigan provides passionate and rooted Michigan readers with honest, fact-driven journalism and engagement opportunities. The state's diverse people, politics, economies. At Bridge Michigan, we believe transparency and accountability are paramount. The foundation of our work, you can learn more about the history. So I'm going to actually show you their website right now, so bear with me. This, just to give you a little bit, and Michael's going to go into this, but this is Bridge Michigan. I've done a little bit of research on them since they called me, and it's just they look like they're the real deal and definitely align with what I'm trying to do with this channel. So I got a call about, like I said, about 3 weeks ago, and a gentleman by the name of Michael Wilkinson was talking to me because he and when I put him on, we're going to share the screen here in a second, and he can clarify if I get any of this wrong. But he was telling me that the migration, the population numbers for Northern Michigan, or for Michigan in general, had been changing forever. Michigan had been losing residents, and he was seeing a change in that. And he asked me from the YouTube channel, he said, is this true? What's going on? So I actually connected Michael with a couple of people who I've sold houses to here recently from Florida, from Texas, and he was actually able to interview them. And there's a really cool article that he did. So Michael Wilkinson, just to give you a little background to him before he hops on, has been a reporter for Bridge Michigan since 2013, focusing on data-assisted reporting using maps, datasets to identify trends and stories. He created Bridge's online dashboard on COVID-19, the state's economy, and Michigan elections. He's a native of Michigan who grew up in Macomb County. If you're not familiar, Macomb County is like the east side of Detroit. Before graduating from the University of Michigan with a degree in anthropology of all things. So that's an interesting, from anthropology to analytics. So I'm super excited to bring Michael on. Our plan tonight, we're going to be able to ask him questions. And I think I'm super excited to be able to do this for the community, because it's not every day you get to talk to somebody like this, and for him to share, an hour of his time on a Thursday at 7:00 at night to answer my questions, to answer your questions, is really a treat. We're very lucky. Whether you're watching this live or if you're watching the recording, I know a lot of you come back on and watch these after we post them. Drop any comments, any questions, and myself or Mike will answer them. And without further ado, I'm going to bring Mike on, and he can give everybody a warm welcome, and let's get started.
Hi, Gino. How are you?
Good. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. I'm probably a little warmer than you are.
What's the temperature there right now?
I'm in Toledo, Ohio, just a few miles south of the border. It is 28 degrees with a biting wind. You can top that, right?
Absolutely. It is 19 degrees right now. We've been in single digits all week. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited for this. Ever since you called, I've learned about what you do and your website, and it's just got a lot of great information. And I think some of what we're going to talk about is going to surprise the audience. So if you're watching this live, make sure you stick around. If you're watching the recording, make sure you watch until the end, because we're going to go over. I've got a bunch of questions for Mike. He's got some stuff for us. So before I hop into the questions, Mike, thank you again for being here. What's going on with Michigan?
Well, I mean, the story for so long, and it's kind of, besides I see you got the Lions helmet in the back there, the Lions actually doing well for a second or third year in a row. The story in Michigan for a number of years has been that we're losing population and we're stagnant. And a lot of that has been driven in part by people leaving the state for retiring, for jobs. It goes that history goes back to the early 80s during the oil embargo crisis that happened during the late Carter's presidency. And so it just continued. In the aughts, we were the only state that lost population, but it's gotten better. And, at the expense of some other states, but, the state is still losing some population to other states as a net, but more people are choosing to come to Michigan for either retirement, higher percentages, it seems, or for jobs. So they see opportunity here or maybe it just looks like a better option than wherever they were for either climate reasons, tax reasons. I mean, I know a lot of people complain about taxes. Michigan has an income tax, but it's not as high a tax as others. So there have been a number of reasons for people to choose Michigan, and you happen to be in one of those areas that has become a little bit of a destination. I mean, is it the same as Austin, Texas, or Seattle? No, but
Right.
compared to where the state was and has been for the last 20, 30 years, it is a market improvement. I was just looking at more data today from private moving van lines, which was even more positive news. Again, we're not to the point where we're adding, 10, 20, 30,000, or, like Texas adds 500,000 a year. But it is trending in a positive direction. And that's good news for people like you who sell houses. So
Absolutely. Are you seeing, Mike, that in the next couple of years, if we continue on this trend, I've got a lot of specific questions, but I'll ask you a general. Where do you think Michigan population wise is going to be in the next 5 years? Do you think we're just going to, you probably don't want to call it hockey stick growth, but do you think we're going to continue to grow? Do you think this is, are the Lions just going to be this good forever? Is this a flash in the pan, or similarly, is Michigan going to experience population growth, or is this just, sort of an anomaly and everything's going to go back to normal at some point?
I mean, the main thing, there's three things that drive population growth. If you have a younger population that's having a lot of kids and more people are born than die, you grow, right? Michigan during COVID, more people died than were born. That gap has narrowed, but we are an older state. We have, we have the median age is around 40. The other way is migration from other states. If more people come here from Indiana, Ohio, and Florida, then you grow. And the other one is international migration. So if you're able to attract people from, via Mexico or Spain or wherever, you can grow. Michigan, has just not had the growth that, when I first started doing, census stuff, when I was at the Detroit News, Michigan was the 8th largest state in the nation. And it was a long way from there to you got to Georgia and North Carolina. Yeah. Well, now we're 10th and they're both above us. Those are hockey stick kind of growth places.
Sure.
I don't know if we're going to see that kind of growth. There's so many wild cards here, especially economic ones. The EV situation, if that revolution, completely goes through, it's going to limit it's going to probably remove a lot of auto jobs. Do people go away or do they find another job? There's a lot of wild card here, but what I am intrigued by, and the reason I called you in the first place, is the people we've heard, as you've heard many times, people are, climate refugees, right? They don't want to live where the hurricanes are, the tornadoes are. We have tornadoes. They don't want to live where earthquakes are, forest fires. They're going to come to Michigan. Well, that sounded good. I mean, it sounded like a reasonable thing. I think we're starting to see some signs that some of that might be true, right? Do you want to pay $10,000, $15,000 a year for flood insurance in Florida? Right. Yes, it's gorgeous there in November, January, and February. But couldn't you also just rent a place? So I think there are things that are very much in Michigan's favor. I would not predict the growth because the demography of the state is older. 50-year-olds don't typically have children. So I don't know, but the signs that we're seeing now are pretty hopeful.
Do you think some of that is we just don't have the housing inventory to absorb the demand? I want to put a pin in that question. I agree with you as far as the climate change. And I think what's really interesting about you and I being able to talk is you obviously see the numbers, and then I see, from the trenches, what's actually happening when I'm on the phone with people. And I would say, Mike, about 5 years ago, I started getting a call here and there. It was so long ago that it actually surprised me when people were listing climate change as a reason they were considering Michigan. And, look, in Michigan, I hope this doesn't offend anybody. We've got one of the things that's interesting about Michigan, maybe this is everywhere, is we have the radical left and we have the radical right. And I didn't know if that was just a climate change enthusiast that was, was using that to justify moving here. Fast forward till today, I hear that on every third call. So it went from, yeah, I agree with you. I think that's actually happening. I think it went from, here and there to, I think a lot of people, and, obviously prayers for everybody in California right now, but it seems like every month for the last few months, we've had the hurricanes in Florida and now we've got wildfires. And it just really feels like, when you look at places, coastal regions and look at the quality of life that suddenly, if you look at Southern Florida, if you look at California, like where they have the wildfires right now, those places are still way more expensive than living in the most expensive places in Northern Michigan. So I definitely wonder if that's going to affect people relocating to Northern Michigan going forward. And we talk about this a lot on the channel. It's sort of a tale of two cities here. We have the people that have been here forever that think the prices have just gotten out of control and they're twice as much as they used to be. And then we have the people that are just sort of realizing Northern Michigan now that say, wow, this, for the quality of life, this is still affordable compared to other areas. Are you seeing anything around that?
Well, I mean, you start out with the question about housing. I think housing will follow where the demand is. If the numbers of people who are moving are there, one, I think you're in an area that politically, because it is largely a little more conservative, can probably move a little quicker than Ann Arbor and Washington, which has a lot of money and a lot of it's a little more conservative on growth, which is odd when you think about they're liberal, but it's conservative on growth. I think you would match it. There's been a huge problem up there, and we've written about it that the people, there's so much money in terms of pushing the housing prices up. The workers who are making on the lower end the service jobs, it's hard for them to find housing, right? There's so many short-term rentals, and we did a story about a teacher wanted to take a job at one of the schools up there, but they were told, well, you can rent, but you've got to be out by X June 1st or whatever, because all summer it's an Airbnb.
Right.
Well, if you got a wife and kid, if you got a family, are you gonna wait a minute, I've got to move. I've got this great teaching job. So I think those pressures can be eased a little bit. I think demand is what's they're gonna push those to ease. But I don't know if that is going to be the problem, because like you just said, I was just looking at a map I made. The highest median home prices in the state, I think we're up in Grand Traverse or Emmett. It was a couple of years ago, but it was like $400 and some thousand a year. Yeah. And there are people, in Colorado who are going, whoa, huh? They can't even wrap their head around it, which, as you know, causes some resentment when they come in and buy it for cash. Yep, and then the family with two kids who wanted to maybe move into a 2,000 square foot house can't afford it. So I'm not sure if there's a government policy that can be enacted to solve that. I would hope that there's going to be just the pressure of the market, which will make homeowner. I mean, there's a lot of land up there, right? I would presume that there are places to put those homes, and I don't know. I mean, you tell me. What is a starter home up there now? I mean,
this is what you're going to point out is the conversation that you're teeing me up for right now, and you're doing a good job. You didn't even mean it. the unintentional tee up. You put the golf ball in the tee. There is a ton of demand, but there's a big gap between what somebody can afford to pay and what somebody can build a house for and still turn a reasonable profit. And that's 100% what we're dealing with right now. And I don't know if we talked about this before, but that's something I think Traverse City does well, is for whatever reason, and maybe it's because there's just, it's almost like there's enough demand here, but not enough demand to push it to where it needs to get to for development. Does that make sense at all? Because you'll see in Traverse City, there's places, I don't know how familiar you are with Traverse City, but anybody listening, south of Traverse City, there's some areas like Grawn, who in the last 5 years, every patch of area is a new subdivision with $300,000 houses, which is great for them because they're still 10, 15 minutes in Traverse City. But Petoskey, Harbor Springs doesn't have that. And even we've had a couple of newer communities start, and they're still $400,000 or $500,000 entry level. So what I would say is, if you ask me, just looking, if I put my Mike hat on and just analyze this market and said, what is an entry level home, meaning the bottom 25% of the market in Petoskey, I mean, that's still $500,000 or $600,000, which might be double of what it needs to be for the service industry workers.
Oh yeah, I mean, how do they get in? I mean, it just,
and that's the issue.
I don't understand.
Right? And then the trickle down, not the trickle down, I don't even trickle down, trickle up, is I've got a lot of friends here that own businesses that can't hire because, and these are decent paying jobs, but the people that live here can't afford to work for, even look, 70 grand a year. I don't know what the median income in Michigan, I know what the median income up here is, but I don't know what the whole state is. But I would argue that there's some jobs up here that have higher than the median income prices, but that still isn't enough. I mean, I did a video a while ago about how you would need to make as a household like $120,000 to be able to afford an entry-level house. Now, look, if you have two people that are married and have two decent jobs, you can accomplish that, but that is unfortunately not the reality for a lot of people.
Yeah, and it's not a Traverse City, it's not an Emmett County problem. I mean, that
Right.
exists all around the country. I mean, what's the median house in San Francisco?
Right.
2.2 whatever million, and
but we don't have tech jobs like San Francisco does.
Yeah, well, true. I mean, but the gap between, there is still someone working at the local diner, and they're not going to make 70 grand a year making pancakes. So,
right.
But then again, that's not just a problem up there. You see that across the country, and I mean that's why housing has been a topic. But if you're coming from one of those hotter markets, it does look affordable. And again, it's in that perspective. But you can see the resentment, but the resentment exists in parts of Grand Rapids and parts of Ottawa County. The same thing is happening. So it's not just a Northern Michigan thing. I mean, Oakland County, where a lot of my coworkers live, they tell me how much, houses are there. And I'm just like, wow. Okay. But there's two couples, two people, they can make 250 or 200, which, 5 years ago, I couldn't even wrap my head around. So things change.
Would you say are people coming to Michigan in general, or specifically Northern Michigan? Do you have a way to track that? I know you mentioned we're going to go into some counties, which I'm excited for, but how would you generalize that?
Well, my sources there's two major sources. There's three. I mentioned that, and it doesn't get down to the county level, but, the Atlas Van Lines, the United Van Lines will do a report every year. And some of them are really good because they ask people, well, why did you move? What did you move for?
Right.
So that's one set of data. The other is, the census does it, it's a survey. So 2 million people a year fill out a survey and they say, where do you live now? Well, I live in Toledo. Where did you live last year? Well, I lived in Toledo. But if you said, Petoskey, then you would go in their database as a migrant from one to the other. So we have those sources. And then there's a great data source is the IRS. When you if you fill out your form in Petoskey this year and last year, they look at your Social Security and say, well, that guy was in Gainesville, Florida. You're a migrant. So we can detect it those different ways. And what that data has shown, and again, they're not the huge numbers that you see to, those people snowbirding to Florida, but you see a net positive number. Marquette, Michigan, which is north of you, you got to cross a big lake to get there. That's showing growth. It's only 600 people over in the last 3 or 4 years. That sounds like nothing. Well, it's only a community of 20,000. Those people got felt because they came in and bought those starter homes that people were buying for $175. They said, well, I'll pay $250. Well, now the other people can't buy. But in Grand Traverse, Leelanau, which is a little bit to your west, Emmett, we are seeing positive trends, and it's continuing. So, I got out some census stuff to give you a little perspective on this. So, if you look at the 7 counties up there, Grand Traverse, Antrim, Leelanau, Otsego, Sheboygan, Charlevoix, and Emmett.
Yeah.
If you go from 2020 to 2023, you had a net gain of 7,200 people. Domestic migration moved from other states to there. The entire rest of the state was down 65,000. So those counties only represent 2.5% of the state's entire 10 million people.
Right. But
they accounted for 7,000 people moving into the state. Now, Wayne County has the biggest problem, right? So, but if you even removed Wayne County from the equation, which is for those people who aren't in Michigan, that's our largest county. That's the county where Detroit is.
Right.
The other rest of the state still lost 11,500 people to the rest of the country. Those 7 counties in the north, again, gained 7,200. They gained population. Only like a handful of counties gained population since then. Ottawa and Kent, which I mentioned before.
Right.
But it does seem, because you've walked around Petoskey and Charlevoix. This isn't a young crowd. There are not a lot of people pushing triplet strollers around. These are migrants. This isn't just a a wave of a baby boom from the local population. So I think it does. I think it is strongly indicative of actual migration, positive migration. There's another one I think I mentioned to you that politically a couple of them moved to the left in the 2024 election, which the entire rest of the state moved to the right. Even if it voted for the Democrat, it voted more for than it did before. You didn't see that enough in Leelanau and Grand Traverse. They still voted. I think one of those group voted for President-elect Trump. But to me, it showed that the people who are moving up there were just a little bit in a different place. It's a higher educated area. Mm-hmm. The people with a bachelor's degree or higher is over 40% in Grand Traverse and in Emmett County. The rest of the state, 32. There are other counties just outside of that region that are below 20. So it is educated people. It is slightly older, higher retirees, and they have some money, and which obviously you feel anytime you walk down the street in Petoskey or Charlevoix.
Sure.
Or Grand Traverse.
Mike, how do you account for, and we were talking about this ahead of our call when I was prepping to have you on tonight, does the fact that we have so many second homes here create a problem with tracking this sort of thing? Because, what happens, or do you have a way to quantify if, somebody that lives here full time sells their house and then somebody who works remotely buys it? Or even with the IRS, I think we had Sam Bailey on, who you don't know who that is, but he's part of the Northern Lakes Economic Alliance. And he was saying it's even hard sometimes to track if somebody's lives here, works remotely in their companies in Tennessee. Do those sort of things make the statistics in Michigan or Northern Michigan a little bit less clear?
Well, we've tried to get at some, what percentage of homes are Airbnb or short-term rentals.
Sure.
There's not an easy way to get out of that. We've been trying to. We've not nailed this down. If in Michigan you own 2 homes, you can only homestead one of them, which gives you a pretty substantial break.
Yep.
And so one thing you can look at is if you there's 100 homes and name that county, and only 80 of them have the homestead exemption. The assumption would be it's a second home, but it's not perfect. You're right; it does make some trouble. The scenario I mentioned before, where the teacher could rent a place, but only for those 9 months. And hey, I got a better gig coming in right behind you. I don't know if it's Grand Traverse or there have been a lot of municipalities that have tried to legislate the second home business. I don't know if they tried to get rid of it.
Traverse City's resisted it extremely hard.
The people have thought about it, but they've not done it. Or what do you mean?
No, I think Traverse City. So we own a short-term rental management company, and Traverse City. Here's what I'll tell you: a lot of the cities, like the city of Petoskey, city of Traverse City, city of Mount Harbor Springs, have just said we're going to limit them, or you're going to have to get a permit. In fact, for a long time, I thought the permit process was just so people believed that they were trying. But I actually know somebody in Petoskey that has been getting fined. That has to stop. I think, and I don't know if you're seeing this yet, but again, just from somebody who's in this business every single day, I think the market is starting to correct itself with the short-term rentals. Right around COVID, they got super hot, and everybody was buying these houses in Northern Michigan for, a lot less than they should have been, and renting them out for a really high rate. And now, there are so many of them, and with a little bit of an economic headwind, and you can tell when you go into a house that's for sale, you can tell if it was a short-term rental. There's some red flags, like the Wi-Fi passwords on the wall, or they've got a bunch of board games. You can tell there's beds everywhere. We've seen a lot of once upon a time short-term rental inventory come back on the market. So I think that is, I don't know if it's finding its equilibrium, but it feels like that's less of a topic than it once was, unless you're seeing something differently.
You're saying that they did have short-term rentals and they just decided to make it to sell the home?
Yeah, the market, for whatever reason, it wasn't as profitable. It was too much work.
Okay.
It was, for whatever reason, they just decided to not do this anymore.
There was just an incredible flood of I'm sorry, I'm trying to find some, I saw some comment in the comment section. Yeah, there had been just such a flood of Airbnbs. Well, as someone who has used Airbnbs, I have been shocked at the cost of them versus other places in the country. So I still think there is a market. I mean, our family just spent a week in Charlevoix in August. It turned out while we were there, this is kind of one of the mushroom houses in Charlevoix.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it was fantastic. The shocking thing was that we found out while we were there that it was sold, and they delayed the closing to the week after we were there, and the people had wanted to get rid of it before we got there, in which case we would have been out the rental.
Right.
But knowing, that market, one, it's such an attractive place to vacation. I can see the full year. I think the person who was buying it was going to be a full year. So, I don't know where that is. I just know the prices have surprised me, and if people pull back and decide not to do it, I guess the prices will rise. But that's their problem, and the renter like me's problem. It would probably be better for the community if there were full-time people. No.
Yeah. I mean, look, that's a great question. It's something we could debate over. Yeah, I would argue that depends how you define better for the community. The economic impact of somebody living in a house is probably better than somebody that rents, the same, a different person every week. So I would agree. I think it's better for the community if it's better for so I got a couple thoughts on this. It's better for the community in the sense of we need more houses in downtown Petoskey for people to live in. I do think where the short-term rentals really benefit the economy there are some rural areas that have low home prices that suddenly people are buying these short-term rentals, and it's creating more demand for some of these properties than they once had before. So no, I agree. I think ultimately it's better if everybody lives in that, if full-time residents or full-time owners live in the house versus it being a short.
Yeah, I mean, it's good it's for businesses, the economy, and for everyone, the plumber, the person who's selling beer, or everyone. But man, it is a great place to vacation.
And the thing with Charlevoix, as you mentioned, a lot of these, Charlevoix and Harbor Springs specifically, they don't have a lot of hotels. Charlevoix has Hotel Earl now, which just opened, but it's very expensive. Those are areas that the reason I think there were so many in Harbor Springs, but there was 132 at one time, was there's one hotel there. There's one that just opened that's a little bit out of town in the course of ski resorts. So there's just a demand for some of these places. People want to come to Northern Michigan. They don't want to buy a house because renting a room for a night's different than buying a whole house. So a little bit has been out of need, but it'll definitely be interesting to watch. It definitely, it feels like that conversation has cooled down, and I don't hear it as much as I once did. So again, as somebody that lives and breathes this industry in this area, it's not nearly as hot button of a topic as it was even 2 years ago.
Okay. I tried to join the chat to answer somebody, and I cannot, so I'll just say it verbally.
Let me do it here.
Leelanau County did still vote for the Democrat in 2024.
Did they?
Yeah, I just looked.
I thought
8407 to 6392.
Is that? Do they usually? You mentioned this earlier. I think is that usually a blue county?
It just switched in the last. And I think it switched in 2016.
Okay.
We just did a story about how even the places that didn't flip blue have become more purple. Even Grand Traverse, which is outside of the city, is fairly conservative and Republican, and the city is more Democrat. So
would you? I got a question that you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but I get a lot of. I try to stay away from politics, although I think in this forum, speaking with you, they make sense because it's part of this overall conversation. Was it so much not Northern Michigan? Was it so much Northern Michigan or Michigan? Northern Michigan has been red as far as I can remember. Leelanau switching in 2016. I remember that being a thing. But with, Michigan, is Michigan still considered a swing state?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean,
did they swing? Is it so much that they swung Republican, or they were just Michigan just for whatever reason aligned with Trump? Because it seems like, I don't remember Michigan, and I haven't been alive that long for elections, but I don't remember Michigan ever going red in my lifetime, except for Trump, and I could be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, they voted for Reagan and Bush.
Okay.
But from '88 until Trump, it had voted for the Democrat in all cases. Then it voted. 45 or 47 counties voted for Barack Obama in 08.
Yeah.
It was kind of, when you look at the map, you're like, wow. A number of northern Michigan counties, a number of upper peninsula counties, and now Leelanau County has voted for a Democrat, but for the most part, the Democratic support, at least at the presidential level, kind of ends around Midland.
Right.
But that doesn't mean they're not Democrats up there. It's just
No,
in
of course.
terms of able to win a national. I mean, but they still voted for Alyssa Slotkin and
Sure.
at the U.S. Senate level. But yeah, I mean, it was, if you go way back into the 60s and 70s, it went back and forth all the time. So we had a long run where it was a Democratic state. At the state level, you've seen it. We had a Republican. I'm not sure where everyone's from who's listening. You had a Republican legislature for 15, 20 years. I mean, the Democrats might have controlled the House for a couple of years, but we just concluded where we had 2 years where the Democrats controlled the governor, the House, and the Senate after 40 years without ever having that happen. So yeah, I still think it's a swing state. I mean, what I find interesting is are Dems really that moderate, and are Republicans really that moderate that it goes back and forth? It seems like it is, like you mentioned, so a little bit more extreme. I mean, when I lived in Tennessee is, I don't know how many times, had a vice president from Tennessee, Al Gore, Estes Kefauver,
Sure.
if I'm getting this right. It's kind of well, not now, but it was a moderate state. It's Democrats were moderate. It's Republicans were moderate. I'm not sure that's the case in Michigan, but it has swung quite a bit in the last. I mean, obviously the last 3 years.
Let me ask you this, Mike, and maybe you don't know this, but this is an interesting question. I'm sure some of our audience would like to hear this. Does population growth follow which way a state leans politically? Meaning, do the red states or the blue states see more people coming or going?
Well, I mean, I know, because the geography has currently that Republicans, that theory would definitely favor Republicans, right? Because the Sun Belt is where the Republicans are. It's where the heat is. It's where people move. And then there's people will say it's causal. It's because they are Republican states.
Right.
It wasn't that long ago that Florida was a swing state, right?
Right.
And everyone might remember Ann Richards, I think, was a Democrat from Texas. So it's not always been that regard way. They are typically lower tax states. Is that the reason people move to Florida, or do they just kind of want to get out of the 12-degree weather in their older years? I know as I get older, I don't mind. I went to Hawaii I went to the South for the first time in February, and I'm like, oh, this is why people do that. Okay. So did I go to Hawaii because Republicans run it? Well, they don't run it. It's Democrats. But so I think it benefits them because they happen to be, the southern states are Republican because it's historic. I mean, it goes back a long, long way. They have the sun. I don't know if it favors them specifically. I mean, there are northern states. Indiana's doing very well, which has always kind of surprised me. It is a Republican state. It also was at one point a swing state. Ohio, which is where I live, is not a swing state anymore, but it's not doing so well in terms of population. So I don't know. It's a mixed bag. I mean, look at the state of Washington. Washington has done great, and that is not a red state at all.
Is Michigan, if you look at the country in its entirety, Mike, how does Michigan rank in terms of population growth, or just population growth? Are there still states getting way more people than us? Are we catching up? What does Michigan look like?
Well, I mean, we just did and this is in part why I'm so interested in this topic. We did some stories in 2020, early 2024, 2023, that from 1990 through 2020, Michigan ranked 49th in growth.
Right.
The only other state that was worse than it was West Virginia, which actually lost people. Michigan gained your brother, and five other people. It was not good. Right. So a lot of states passed us. And we were just clobbered. We were clobbered during the recession. You go back to the one I mentioned before, the 90s, or the 78, 79 to 82, clobbered by that. So those people, after they moved to Texas, weren't around to have kids. So that's, so they call us like this echo boom in the wrong way. We got, our high water mark was 1999, 2000 in employment. we went into a one-state recession during that for a number of years, and then the financial thing happened in 2007, 8, 9. So Michigan really struggled, but a lot of things seem to be going a lot better. We have unemployment. Our gap in unemployment, we used to be like 2-3 percentage points behind the nation in unemployment. If we were at 6, this nation was at 4. People in the rest of the country are like, what are you talking about, recession? And we're like, yeah, man, we're hurt. Well, now we're just a half percentage point, and it's low. It's okay. I mean, there's still people who are unemployed, and it's not good.
Sure.
But it is much better than it used to be. And I just looked at it before we got on. Those counties of Grand Traverse, Leland, Star, they're under 4% jobless rate right now in October. The state as a whole is 4.7. So economically, they're doing better, and the state's doing better. So it no longer. When I first saw that the state that the region, the Midwest, might have gained people from other countries, I almost didn't believe it. But I think there's enough kernels of evidence from your experience with your own clients and these other data points that I think it might be happening. It's fragile. I mean, all it takes is
absolutely.
Who knows what could happen in the next 6 months to a year, but it's positive.
I think the word fragile is correct, because right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but it feels like what I'm seeing, the people that I'm just dealing with, and maybe it's the higher price point or what have you, it seems like it's retirees and remote workers, like almost exclusively. Maybe to some extent, somebody moving up or somebody, but we see very little, and maybe you track this. We see very little people. There are very few. I haven't had somebody call me that's moving to Petoskey from Traverse City or vice versa in a while. Do you track, or do you see a lot of moving within the counties in northern Michigan, or is that just something you can't quantify?
Well, it is tracked. I mean, I've not tracked it so much because I'm running from the perspective of the state. I did look at it a lot closer when I was working at the Detroit News, because Wayne County lost so much population, and they just they would lose it to the border. They would lose it to other states, but they would also lose it to Macomb County, Oakland County.
They make a little bit of money and they go to Oakland County.
Yeah. Or this got. There's so much movement into southern Macomb County, and I think they just got tired of, the ailments that Detroit suffered from, which are they're not gone, but they've been minimized, thankfully. But so often the biggest moves are between two counties, right? So the most migration is between Ohio and Michigan. Why? Well, we share 3 counties, share a border. Right. You can keep the same job and just kind of go other side. You see the same thing in Indiana. But what I have seen before in the county moves is you could see movements from Cook County, Illinois, which is obviously Chicago, to Kent County. You could see from Cook County to Grand Traverse County. So I think that, what is true at the domestic, between two states level, is also going to be true at intra-state level. A lot of those places that people are moving. You probably know way better than I do that, some couple lived in, wherever in Oakland County, and they had a place up there.
Right.
Good. That's I like to ski, and I'm not afraid of the snow. I'm just gonna make that my full-time residence. So you do see that. I've not looked at that as closely, but I'm glad you mentioned it, because I think that's warrants some additional. And if I do, I'll call you about it.
Perfect. It's funny. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I say, one thing that I almost didn't believe when the first time they showed it was right during the second year of COVID, because the numbers were so small. The surveys were picking up people remote working to real rural counties in northern Michigan, the Macostas, the Missaukis, which I really couldn't believe, because I thought if you're going to go to where you are. But no, what's affordable? Missaukee is affordable. Kalkaska is affordable. Marquette, even though it's still more than what a lot of people locally can do, it's affordable, and it's beautiful up there.
So to touch on what you just said a second ago, my son during COVID, goes to a private Catholic school. He was in he's in 5th grade now, but he was probably in 2nd or 3rd grade back then. And a lot of schools went virtual. Their school said either come in person or don't come at all. So very hard line in the sand. So that first year, there were 22 families that had second homes in northern Michigan that stayed here and sent their kids to particular school. Now, a lot of them have gone back over time, but I think there's a couple of things. I think you're right. I think during COVID, a lot of people spent, I knew people that were from Metro Detroit that had houses on Walden Lake or Burt Lake or Lake Charlevoix or wherever. And down there, you're, right next to each other, you're stuck in your house all day, and they're up here kayaking or paddleboarding around their boat on the lake. So if you have, you're talking about fairly affluent people. If you have the means and the ability to do that, do you want to be holed up in your subdivision in Oakland County, or do you want to be on the lake in northern Michigan? It's something else that I think is really helping. I don't know if you knew this or not. You probably did, but I'll tell you anyways. I think one very not minor, but very small change is in the last 5 to 10 years, the availability of internet in northern Michigan I don't have the statistic, but has grown exponentially. There are places, I have a house over in this little town called Afton on 50 acres that if you told me 10 years ago we would have wireless internet there, I would have said you're crazy. But there are a lot of areas through fiber optic, through some of the utility companies have brought high-speed wireless internet in, and that has really helped the ability to people. It has opened up the amount of houses that were available for people that wanted to work from home. So this is probably a stupid question, but do you ever track things like, Wi-Fi coming to an area and suddenly that area explodes or not explodes, but grows with popularity, or just certain infrastructure, causing some of this growth?
Yeah, I mean, we the state has made it a priority to try to expand. I mean, not just the state, but the federal government, because there's been such a deficit for rural areas. Because there's not. I mean, where I live, I mean, do I get my fiber optic cable from a fiber optic line from AT&T, or do I get it from the local cable company? I have multiple choices.
Yeah.
And up there, it was, what are you talking about?
Right.
There's not cable. You probably have satellite. So there's been a push for a long time to improve it. And apparently, is what you're saying, it's been very successful, or more successful. I mean, there's still parts of the state that don't have it.
Very few.
We did a story
up here. Very few up here
that don't have. Yeah. So I mean, I think the economics are really in your favor that they're going to put it in. But we did a story about a guy who literally created his own company to lay line, and I was like, how is this going to work? Right. But he did it. He was his own Wichita lineman, and I'm sure he ultimately hired people.
Sure.
But it's something that people have to have. So, I mean, I will bet that my internet bill might be lower than yours. I don't know. It's $100.
What do you pay? Let's find out. What do you know what you pay?
$100.
Ours is like at the off. I don't know which is which. One is 120. One between my house and the office. One's 120. One's 140. So you got us beat, but not that much.
Not that bad.
No, I get to see the water every day.
Huh?
And I get to see the water every day.
Yeah. I like if I turn on the faucet, I get to do that. So you got me beat. So yeah, it's and for those remote workers. I mean, if they truly are a remote worker, right. I mean, they're not going to choose a place that doesn't have Wi-Fi. I'm surprised. I was planning a vacation to a place, and I booked the Airbnb. They said, "We just want you to know you're not going to get TV, and I'm like, and we don't have Wi-Fi." They said, "But your phone will still work."
Okay.
And I'm like, sounds like the perfect vacation.
Yeah, that's an actual vacation.
But if I'm working, my boss really wants to be able to reach me and have the ability to do what I do. So it is important. And I haven't seen the broadband map. I mean, they're out there. Yeah. I will bet you that the region you're in is just solid. I mean, especially around, the harbor, little Traverse Bay. There's just no reason that you shouldn't. I mean, you have a different topographical problem. You actually have hills where we don't down here. That might, you have to have towers, repeating towers. But do you have good wireless up there?
Yeah, I mean, we have typically in northern Michigan, if you live here, now it's changing a little bit, but most people either have Verizon or AT&T, and you can argue which one's better. I've had Verizon forever. I know people that have AT&T. It's fine. There is a T-Mobile. There's actually a T-Mobile store here. I don't know anybody that has T-Mobile here, but maybe they have a store, so they must have some service. But no, and it's there's some areas. There used to be a stretch when you're driving from like Gaylord to Petoskey. There was a stretch where there forever wasn't Wi-Fi. Now there is. Now there's like a handful, not even a handful, 2 or 3 spots on the entire area that we cover that have poor cell phone service. But cell phone service just isn't an issue here. Sometimes, not very often, sometimes in the summer we have an issue, and I think it's because there's so many people here that the towers can't handle it.
Yeah, I mean, you go to a sporting event, you try to text somebody,
Yeah,
it's like, wait a minute, this isn't working. So yeah, I could, especially with you get so many people coming up, Cherry Festival and other things.
absolutely.
It's like a football game when it's just it's just not built to that scale. But the positive things are happening. I have a question for you though. I mean, maybe this gets addressed. What are the healthcare options up there? Luckily, I didn't need them during my week in Charlotte.
Yeah.
I have needed them, but I did not need them.
So I'll give you the answer that we talk about this a lot in the videos. We have McLaren and Petoskey just around the corner from the office. So there's two health centers or health care systems, McLaren, Munson. I've never had a bad experience. I'm fairly healthy. Some people, I hear mostly good things. I do hear some negatives, but maybe that's just how the world is. One thing we talk about in our videos, though, is if you do need a specialist, you're probably driving to University of Michigan, Detroit, Grand Rapids. So that's somebody that's always lived here. That's just part of living here. But if you're used to having a specialist, if you're used to living in, Bloomfield Hills and you're used to having Beaumont and all the, the bigger hospitals, it's probably going to be a little bit inconvenient. But people often ask me, how are the schools? How are the hospitals? And I always say, if the hospitals weren't great, we wouldn't have so many retirees. And if the schools weren't great, we wouldn't have so many families. And I think that's just the proof is in the pudding. And it's about as simple as you can state it.
Yeah, I guess I never thought, but I know the Traverse City school enrollment has stayed pretty stable. I think it's gone up. I mean, you've got
you track enrollment. I'd love to hear about that.
Oh, I don't know down to
that's general you can be. I'm sure that the audience would be interested to hear.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we look at all the time is schools, how they're changing, how they're accepting kids from other districts.
Yeah,
and but aren't the two Traverse City high schools Class B or C? I mean, they're not small high schools, right?
They're not. If Ian is still on, he can weigh in. I think they might even be Class A.
Okay.
If anybody's listening, drop a comment for Traverse City. I don't know. Drop it. Is Traverse City Class A or B? See if anybody.
And there are two public high schools, and then there's the Traverse City Catholic, right?
It's called St. Francis, but yes.
Okay.
So Traverse City, Petoskey both have Catholic schools called St. Francis.
There's a high school, a Catholic high school in Petoskey.
That's not okay. So there is. Let's get into the weeds a little bit. So
okay,
Petoskey St. Francis is from DK through 8th grade. There is a small Catholic high school that they've done a really good job of trying to grow, but it's still small, called St. Michael's. I should look, but they're class. There might be. I don't want to say anything wrong, but it's very small. I can report back to the numbers, but it's small. And that's one of the major differences between Traverse City and Petoskey is we just don't have, Traverse City has enough to support a Catholic high school people, and we don't. So that's just the truth of the matter.
But my memory of census data is Petoskey and Charlevoix did grow in population.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, and Traverse City and Traverse City. I mean, Grand Traverse County. Sometimes we hear when we've done stories up there that people complain about the housing, and obviously from the employer perspective, trying to get workers who can get people that can work, it is an issue. But I chuckle because I have heard it here in Toledo when people complain about traffic. I used to live in Chicago, and I'm like, you really can't complain about traffic? Do people still complain about traffic?
It's a good point, Mike. I'm glad you brought it up with that lens. They do. The only people that complain about traffic here are people that haven't seen Chicago or real traffic. Okay. It gets busier. Look, Traverse City during the Cherry Festival. Traverse City, and I talk about this in the other video, in a lot of the videos we do. Both Traverse City and Petoskey, the roads, especially the main roads into the town. Let's talk about Traverse City first. Traverse City is just busy. Like, it's been busy my whole life. It's gotten busier. The road when you come into Traverse City comes around the bay. You're not making that road any bigger. Like, you're just not. Petoskey's the same way. The major difference with Petoskey is anybody going from, anywhere north into Charlevoix, Traverse City is probably going to come through here. And what Petoskey really needs is a way to get through town that isn't like a different way than it is now, because now there's really only one way to get through Petoskey, and that does cause some traffic. But even with as busy as it's gotten and on the busy weekends, what's nice is usually when it's busy here, people are on the water. They're not driving down the street, versus Chicago. So they complain about the traffic. It's not as big of a deal as you would think it is.
Yeah, why are you up there, right? I mean, you've chosen to live up there, and if it takes another 5 minutes, 10 minutes, at the end of the day, you're looking at the water, and I've got to turn on the faucet. So, I don't.
The biggest traffic concern like we have is over in Charlevoix, the drawbridge that goes up every hour.
Oh yeah.
If you time that wrong, you're not. I want to say you're in trouble, but in fact, the values on the north side of the bridge are affected by the bridge. Whether you're in the north side of the bridge in Charlevoix or the south side, the house prices are different.
I would presume north is lower.
North is higher because you don't have to deal with the bridge.
Oh, okay. Okay, I see it. I, as a pedestrian, I ran into that bridge. Not ran into the bridge, but I did have to wait. But I was walking and I didn't care, so I was like, "Oh, there's a nice bridge. There's some boats." So
this is a good point. Cutesy Patootie said the great thing about summer is you can bike to work. Yeah, you can.
Absolutely.
Traverse City does a good job with that. I wish Petoskey would adopt that because I like cycling. Traverse City has like bike lanes, which again, if Ian's watching, he hates the cyclists, but that's a him problem. I do think it would be interesting if we could have more alternative transit versus just cars, because you live in northern Michigan. It's nice out in the summertime. That's when you're here. It'd be cool to see them extend some of the walkways and some of the bike trails just to, I don't know, make it a little easier to get around.
I went for a couple bike rides in Charlevoix. What's the road to Petoskey? Is that 31?
Yeah.
So I was on the bike path, and I never got to the point where this summer it was closed.
Right.
And I said, well, I could just hop on the road and ride on the road for however far it was. And I just watched all that traffic for about 25 minutes. I'm like, I am not riding my bike on the shoulder.
So do you know what happened there?
Pardon?
Do you know what happened there? Do you know why you have to ride on the side of the road there?
Well, I mean, did the water sweep out?
So there was use. So that stretch used to go from Charlevoix to Harbor Springs, and it was the part that washed out was like I still have a couple of pictures of it. One of the prettiest stretches you'll ever see on a bike, and it washed out one day. This was not forever ago, probably 5 years ago now. And they're working on rebuilding it, but in the meantime, the only way to get around it is they have to reroute you on an extremely they've done a decent job of blocking it off, but on an extremely busy corner they have like some pylons so you can't. But I agree, if I would just go a different way. That's not something I like.
How long do you have to be on 31?
It's got to be a mile, somewhere a half a mile, something like that.
Yeah, that's I've ridden on the road a lot where I live, and I don't mind if there's cars, but all those semis, no thanks. But that stretch, when they do fix it, I'm not here to knock it.
It's going to be $20-30 million to fix. I mean, it's a big deal. They're working on it though.
But it's just beautiful. I mean, and I did not know you could go. I wanted to go all the way to Petoskey because I knew I could go from Charlevoix. I'd drive back. It's just a gorgeous ride, and there was obviously a lot of people who were taking great advantage of that. I look forward to getting done.
Yeah, absolutely. What else do you see happening for Michigan? Is this a situation we talked a lot about remote work, retirees? If employers start to push back on people working remotely, is that going to move the needle here?
Well, I mean, one, I think I think they are pushing back.
Okay. Are we?
We're now going into a president who says, if you're a federal employee, get back to work or quit you're fired. Will that happen? I know there's union contracts. It could slow a little bit. But I don't know if anyone rolled the dice and moved to, Cadillac, in a situation where their employer didn't. I mean, I would presume most people who have already done it were confident enough that it wasn't just, here's, crossing your fingers, here's hoping. I work remotely, largely. I wouldn't try to pull it off because a couple times, 4 times a month, I do have to find myself in Ypsilanti or Lansing. If this was a bigger trend, if like tens of thousands of people had just decamped for Alpena and Sheboygan and Charlevoix, I think there could be an issue here. But I think the people who are making that move are confident that their employer, at least, is not going to try to I mean, they aren't a federal employee,
right?
In Lansing, it's like, man, no one's looking. I'm gosh, I got this sweet property in Antrim County. They'll never notice. I hope they didn't do that.
I don't know if you heard this, Mike, but this is something that I'm surprised we're not talking more about this in the world. I understand why we're probably not, but have you heard anything about the Wexford County hack?
What he's just talking about?
Yeah,
I'm actually writing it down because I have no idea what you're talking about.
You're going to be surprised that you don't, especially with as dialed in as you are. And I didn't know until he told me, and I actually had a call from somebody, a vendor who was trying to get my business, it was kind of an off the cuff thing. So here's a story. Ian, you can fill in the blanks. This Dr. Ian Ashton is a really good friend of mine. He's like our preferred lender. He's incredibly intelligent. He lives in Traverse City, which he always comes on to give a perspective. So we're like the same people, but I live here, he lives there. So anyways, he's a really, really, really productive loan officer. So Wexford County, which is where Cadillac is, was, I guess, hacked. And I'm just telling you what I know. So nobody, sue me. They're registered. Their whole government was hacked. So they're registered. Like, you can't do a real estate transaction in Wexford County right now because their ransomware, whatever, has locked the county system, and they can't do title searches. They can't do deeds. And it's been like that. Ian, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's been like that for 2 months. And I'm really surprised this story hasn't gotten more. You should look into it. I mean, hey, maybe I give you your next big scoop. But crazy that we live in a world that this is a thing. And I'm really interested to see how this turns out.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because one, I did not know about it. And at first I'm like, this sounds familiar. And the reason it sounds familiar is the county just south of me, Wood County, which is where Bowling Green State University was hacked. And they paid $3 million in ransom to be unhacked. And they acknowledged to the public, which I was a little surprised, because it seems like you've just put a dollar figure.
You've set the value, you've set the market.
Yeah.
But a place like Wexford County, where's Wexford County going to get? I mean, I don't know what their budget is, but $3 million has to be a lot of money to them.
Yeah, I mean, Wood County has 135,000 people. I don't think Wexford has 20.
No.
So, yeah, has it been? I would presume it's in the news.
It's not, and we talk about this, and I think it's strategic. I think it's not because I think they want to keep. Here we are talking about it. To
a reporter.
Yeah, to a reporter. Yeah, there we go. Don't quote me in this article, Cody.
Well, no, I'm going to reach out to them, or we will reach out.
I think they're trying to keep it quiet because I don't think they want this to be. There's no positive for it to be public, other than nosy people like me and you and stuff.
Well, I mean, the thing is, so it's public in that every person in the real estate business who's tried to file a deed, and they said, "Can you come back in? I don't know, maybe March." I mean, they all know about it. So I just went to mail something to my daughter, and someone next to me showed up, and they said, "Hey, yeah, here, I want to mail this to. I want to mail it." I said, "Oh, it's going to Canada. I can't mail it." I look over. I'm like, "What?" They're on strike. So every person who comes in, and it actually happened twice in the time I was at the post office. Anyone who comes in there who wanted to send something to Canada knows that they're on strike. I didn't know they were on strike. So I'm going to guess every person in Wexford County in the real estate business is very well aware. Marriage. Can they do marriage licenses? Can they get your spouse died? Do you want to get the life insurance? Can you get the death certificate? I mean, I can go on and on.
I guess what's happening that I heard is, when people are left to their own devices, anarchy breaks out. And, if you have look, I have real estate transactions where somebody needs to move into the house by X date and they can't wait 2 months. So I've heard this. I don't know if it's true. That people are like moving into the houses before they close and not liking it and moving out. And it just sounds like an absolute nightmare.
I smell attorneys parachuting out of the sky, Cadillac, to solve this problem.
On the topic of controversial stories, what happens to Michigan if Canada becomes part of the U.S.?
Oh, well, I shouldn't say it's not. I should say it's not going to happen. I've vacationed there many times, mostly in Ontario, but I just recently went to Alberta and British Columbia. They don't want to be part of our country. I think some of them do. I think some of the people would love to have the ability to come down here. I remember. You go to Canada, right?
All the times. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know how old you are, but there was a time, oh my gosh, 15, 20 years ago, where this is actually where you used to exchange money. and you'd give them $100 and they would hand you back 140. You're going, this is the greatest vacation of my life. And I remember I made a comment to someone like that at a bank. I wasn't over the top. And she goes, I like Florida and I can't go right now, because the reverse is true. Right. So I think there's some, and then when it ultimately got to par, so I'm sure they went to Florida then, but some of those people couldn't come down here unless the dollar was at a better situation. So I'm sure there's a lot of people in Canada who would love to have better flow. Economically, man, it's a tough call. What it would mean for Michigan, wow. I mean, we still have the lakes between us, right? I mean,
very small ones.
Lake St. Clair may be small. Lake Erie, no.
See, I have. So it's funny because I have two experiences with going to Canada. From living, I went to college. I don't think I told you this, but I went to college at Oakland University. So Canada was like, Windsor was like the double whammy, because not only was our money worth more, but you had to be 19 to drink instead of 21. So
yeah, I didn't mention that part, but yes, I became very well aware of that.
I'm sure, I used to do that all the time. Not all the time, but enough. But then there's Sioux Canada up here where I'm at now, which is about, I don't know, probably 2 hours from here. And we see a lot of, like, in the Upper Peninsula, there's a lot of, do people from Canada ever move here? Like, I'm sure you know that statistic. Do we ever see it?
Yeah, I played hockey, recreational hockey, and I ran into more than a couple people who had made that move. Some of them were medical people, doctors, or nurses. A nurse I remember playing. They just didn't have the opportunity there, both financially and then just the geographic diversity. And since they had a skill in the United States, they could move here. They didn't have to just meet an American woman. I also worked with someone at the Detroit News who drove over the border every day.
Right. Interesting.
So I was like, wow, really? His name was same last name. He actually got one of my bonus checks.
Oh, gosh.
We had the same last name, and luckily he brought it back to me. But yeah, I think that I think it would be a win for Michigan. Would it empty Ontario out? I don't know. I just don't think it will happen. I would hope it would not happen, because if you've been up there as you have, it is different culturally. They speak the same language, but it's just like going to England.
Some of it though, one time I drove from Port Huron through Canada to New York. People don't realize how much of, first of all, there's two things I think people don't understand about Canada. One is most Canadians live very close to the U.S. border.
Oh my God, yeah. I think it's 90% within 100 miles.
On that trip, you get deep into French-speaking territory, meaning the roadsides are French. Like it's a different country. Now, I don't know if that's what you've experienced, but that was certainly my experience.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it many times going there. I think they're unique enough. Well, why? What's the upside? What's the point? Yeah, I wouldn't want to see it, but that doesn't mean if it did happen, I think it would be a boon for Michigan, a big time boon.
Do you have time for one more question?
Sure.
This was something I didn't plan to ask you, but what does President-elect Trump, his inauguration's next week, what does he mean? What does his presidency mean, if anything, in your prediction? We're not going to hold you to anything. Does he, with him in office, how does Michigan specifically, population, housing, jobs, property, how does it change? What happens?
Well, I did a story. I wrote it at the end of last year. It ran this week. You can find it on bridgemi.com, where we just
Can I drop a link? What's the story? I'm gonna drop a link. So
I don't have the link on it.
What was the title of the story? I'll look it up.
It was about Trump promises.
Trump promises. I bet this will come up on your website.
You can find it. It's near the top. So he came to Michigan. It was one of the number one places he came to because it was a swing state.
It was the last place. His last campaign was in Grand Rapids.
Grand Rapids. He did it. He ended his campaigns in 2016, 2020, and 2024 there. Well, 2016 and 2024 for sure. I don't know about 2020. But anyhow, he made all these promises in Michigan, and a lot of them were really specific to Michigan. Yes, he said everywhere, you won't be taxed on tips, you won't be taxed on overtime. But in Michigan, he promised to restore the auto industry, and his vehicle to do that was the tariffs and getting rid of some of the standard. He called them mandates on cars, so that he called them the EV mandates. if he follows through that and the tariffs act as he says they will, and there's a lot of economic belief that they will not, but it works this way, then maybe jobs move back and maybe we get a manufacturing boost. But even the public is starting to realize that tariffs might raise costs to people.
Sure.
It might hamper some sales. It's a mixed bag, and we there are so many things that we just don't know. If a lot of people who happen to work in the state's agricultural industry find themselves on the other side of the southern border, that's going to have an impact. It's going to be fascinating to watch, and we know he made Michigan such a centerpiece of his campaign. Let's look at the list. What are you going to do for companies that are in the automotive business that wanted to do R&D? You were going to take you're going to allow people to deduct the interest on their auto loans. That was for Michigan, if they buy an American car. So we don't know yet. I mean, there's a lot of indications, really specific ones. He said he was going to cut the cost of gas and all energy in half. So last time you bought gas, how much was it? $3.30, $3.10, $2. He says it's going to be $1.50 in 1 year. So if it happens, that's good, right? Although the last time I remember gas being like $1.50, it was at the height of COVID, and it was at $1.50 because no one was buying gas, and that was really bad. But he said he thinks it's going to go the other way, and we'll just have to see if what he says comes to fruition, and if it has the intended help for the state. He says he's going to help the state, and I don't doubt that he's going to try. We just don't know if his prescriptions for helping are going to work. Not yet, at least.
What is your economic outlook for 2025 right now in my business, which is obviously primarily what I focus on? It's really through the first 2 weeks of the year, it feels like, we're just caught in, there's low inventory and buyers are resistant to not just the prices. I mean, certainly the prices, because that's the symptom, but they're resistant to the cost of buying a $600,000-$700,000 house, which is what you have to do here in Petoskey with a 7% interest rate. That is an incredibly high mortgage rate. So we're battling low inventory and then a little bit of buyer hesitation. So through the first, again, 2 out of 52 weeks of the year, seems like the world might be changing a little bit. Certainly the housing market. What are you seeing, or what are your predictions?
Well, we do an economic dashboard where we have all these different measures.
Yeah, perfect.
It's called the Michigan Economic Dashboard, bridge.com, Michigan Economic Dashboard.
And
so you can kind of see where we are. I think there's going to be a lot of people in that boat because we're promised to get the extension of the tax cuts from 2017, probably some additional tax cuts. The economy will like that. Tariffs could raise inflation back up potentially. My wife and I actually talk about, do we want to build a house? Do we want to buy a house, our last house? Because we want a first floor main bedroom, kind of a pipe dream at this point. But I think a lot of people are going to be cautious. So at least in your market, I don't suspect that to change for the next, we just don't know. We've got 2 weeks till inauguration.
Yeah.
We're going to take a lot of action on the first day. We have the Fed that's going to have another chance to, they tap the brakes on lowering interest rates, which will help the person with a mortgage. I think there's so much uncertainty right now that I don't see it unleashing. If the tax cuts happen, if the interest rates go down, at least in terms of the stock market's going to go crazy. So, right. But not everyone owns stocks. A lot of people do. Probably a lot of people who are watching have them.
Yeah, or whatever.
But I don't think that's going to be a positive that will be equally distributed across the country.
No, I appreciate that. I've kept you over. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience? Where can they keep, I didn't know what Bridge Michigan was until you called me, unfortunately, but now I pay attention to it as much as I pay anything.
I just appreciate.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just appreciate anyone who wants to check us out, www.bridgemi.com. We've been around I've been there since 2013. We've been around since 2011. Our staff has grown exponentially. Used to be 3 or 4 of us. Now it's over 30. We cover everything in the state from, the legislature to education to healthcare to business. We try to, be as nonpartisan and as fair to both sides as we can be. And if we were able to gain your eyeballs and interest, we'd appreciate it. But the trends that Gina was talking about, that I've talked about, they're really important for the state, and we continue to track them, and we will continue to track them. And before the night is over, I will be Googling about the Wexford County Register of Deeds hack. But so this works both ways. I get a great story tip out of it. But I thank everyone for taking the time to listen.
All right, Mike, thank you so much. I hope we stay in touch.
All right, we will.
It means a lot, and we will talk next time.
Hey, thanks so
everyone.
much.
Yep,
Take
bye.
care.